Most of us have a hard time slowing down, saying no, and doing less. Join us as we talk about Sabbath rest today on Family Vision.
Hi, my name's Amy Rienow. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Rienow, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversation.
Rob and Amy Rienow here with Visionary Family Ministries. We have been looking forward to this time with you on the Family Vision podcast, and we wanted to welcome some new families to the Family Vision community. I am going to have to work hard to get this pronunciation right, but we're so happy that you are here. The Harushimana family from Bujumbura, Burundi.
That's impressive. I could not do that. You're better at phonics than me. Like, I can't break that apart. I would be brutal saying those names.
Well, we also won't play the previous takes here in the studio with producer Biff.
I'm not saying you got it exactly right, but I think you did better than most of us would.
The point is the Visionary Family community is growing with families all over the world. The Rothermel family, Peter and Jackie in South Carolina, the Rush family here in Illinois,
I'm partial to that name. Yes.
I know, our dear son Rush, are a part now of this Visionary Family communities. Families around the world who are just saying, we want to follow Jesus, we want to help our kids follow Jesus, and we want to link arms with the team at Visionary Family Ministries. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a Visionary Family, just go to our website, visionaryfam.com, and click the Join the Community button. We are continuing, sweetheart, our conversation on the 10 Commandments. Last week, we started talking about the Fourth Commandment, to remember the Sabbath, but there's a lot there. Last week we sort of did some background, but this week we're going to get into some more practical application.
Yeah, so I'm going to reread the text from Exodus 28. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." It's really interesting as we read this, and I know I can very much relate to this idea of being commanded to rest. I know that often rest is considered a negative or a weakness in our culture. And I struggle with resting. Like, if I'm caught resting, if I'm honestly, what I find so interesting is reading. I mean, I think that comes from being a massive extrovert. But if I'm reading a book, I feel like that's a waste of time. Like, I'm not being productive if I'm sitting on a couch and reading a book. Like, that's, it feels funny. It feels too luxurious to have the opportunity and the freedom to do that. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't think culturally that was how it was. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to even wear that, if that's just me. But I know I've talked to other moms who feel the same way, that it's difficult to rest at times because we're sort of programmed to think that we always should be doing something productive.
Well, again, last week we talked about some of the background of this commandment. But one of the questions that comes up is, why is the Christian Sabbath, or specifically why do Christians have our day of worship on Sunday rather than the Jewish Sabbath of Saturday? Saturday is the seventh day, the last day of the week, the day that God rested from creation. Sunday's the first day of the week, so why the change? Well, the simple reason is that Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning should be in the spirit of Resurrection Sunday. And as I did more Bible study on this in preparation for today, I learned some things I never knew about how often the Bible affirms this pattern. So, Jesus rose from the dead on the first day. In fact, every one of the Gospels even uses that phrase, on the first day of the week, on the first day of the week. Then that same day, John 20, verse 19, it says, on the evening of that day, the first day of the week, that's the first time Jesus appears to his disciples. Then a week later, John 20, verse 26, on the first day of the week, Jesus appears to them again, this time with Thomas, the day of Pentecost. is Sunday. It's the first day of the week. And then we know Christians in the book of Acts gathered for worship on Sunday, Acts chapter 20, verse 7, 1 Corinthians 16:2 as well. And as it became known, John records in Revelation 1, the early Christians increasingly called Sunday the Lord's Day. So there's an incredible biblical pattern and emphasis where God is going out of his way to tell us that this is when Jesus rose, this is when Jesus met with his disciples, this is the day of Pentecost, this is when the early Christians met. So 2 application points here. One is there's a reason in a biblical pattern for Christians to gather to worship Jesus on Sunday, the first day of the week. But number 2, the commandment for Sabbath rest is connected to this, but not necessarily bound by it.
Okay.
As a pastor for many years, Sunday was by no means a day of rest. Now, it was a day of worship, but it was a day of labor. So like many pastors, I took my day off on Mondays. That was my Sabbath rest, and my Sunday was my commitment to worship.
Well, again, I think what you're saying, it goes to the 2 parts of this commandment. And I just want to come out and keep saying this is not easy, and it's still a point where I think we as a family and as we have to learn and pray and ask the Lord how he wants us to honor this commandment in our home.
Absolutely.
There's 2 components to it. It's a day to keep holy, and it's a day for rest. And like as you already said, you know, Sunday, by continuing to worship on Sunday, going to church was a day to focus on keeping it holy. But because you were working, you arranged your rest on another time. I think it was S.M. Davis that this got my attention many years ago. And you like as you said, this used to be called the Lord's Day. That's not that long ago. I mean, even in the 1800s, this would be more commonly viewed as be told, the Lord's Day as opposed to Sunday. And I think in the S.M. Davis service, he said, it's been so reduced into our culture that now it goes from the Lord's Day to Sunday, and now we just call it the weekend. I mean, many people who are not a part of a body of believers, there's really no difference between Saturday or Sunday. It's just the weekend. It's just one big, time for fun and rest. Like they've got the rest part down, so it's harder for them to have the keep it holy, keep it separate part. But I think for many of us, it's really difficult to develop a habit of rest. And again, we've talked about this before, like especially the church culture you were part of as you first entered, there was a sense of almost like you were more holy if you were working all the time and never taking a rest. That, if you could, put in so many hours at church, that was a sign of what a good Christian you were. Kind of going back to the legalism again, like counting how many hours that I worked all day Sunday, and that's a badge of quote unquote holiness. And that is really breaking this commandment because you're not taking a rest or valuing rest. Another thing that a practical application that really helped me to think about how the early church would have thought about Sabbath was always evening to evening. Again, I go back to Carol Joy Side. She was the one who really stressed this, that, when that comes from the Genesis account that says there were evening and there was morning the first day. So that the day is in many ways from the Jewish tradition, it went evening to evening. And that's how the traditional Jewish Sabbath continues to go, evening to evening. And that was helpful for me because when I came into like Sunday and how to keep this day as a day of rest, I would think of it starting at Saturday at 5 o'clock. So I really tried to not cook on Saturday at 5 o'clock so that if I have not cooking on Saturday at 5 o'clock because that's kind of a lot of work that I don't really enjoy, cooking and cleaning up. That gets tedious for me. So if I can not do that on Saturday and not have to do that again to 24 hours later till Sunday evening, I definitely feel a sense of rest from not having to do that activity or trying to, not do laundry or not do certain things in this 24 hours from evening to evening. And it was also helpful for me that because then by Sunday evening, if you're trying to think of Sunday as a day of rest, but everyone's got light, your kids start things on Monday. So it's really, you can't really be resting till after 5 o'clock because you've got to gear up for the next week. So that was a helpful thing for me. Another thing was that my sister-in-law has taught me a lot about rest. my sister-in-law, Meg, is a single mom, and she, I think, has done a deep dive into this concept of rest. And one thing that she encouraged me to do, to be intentional even about, this is going to, for a lot of moms out there, really, like, don't do the dishes for 24 hours. Like, really don't, like, let things just get undone. And that, in some ways, you just, like, as me, I'm like, I kind of push against that, because I hate it when I don't get things done before I go to bed at night. I feel so much better if I go to bed with feeling like it's clean and established. But I think out of her life, it being a single mom, she really had to let go of a lot of things. And it taught me that is okay. That part of your Sabbath can be really a letting go. And like, all of the work is still going to be there for you, but to be intentional about putting it aside. And because I think often we think in our culture we cannot rest unless everything is done. But that's not practical. And even with our kids, with their work that they have to do with homework and everything, I can remember I have a couple type A overachievers, and I think it was RW in high school who was still planning on getting all of his, all this work that he had to still do Christmas Eve. And I was like, you are absolutely not working on Christmas Eve. Like, you're not going to do that. But that might be even something you have to help your kids to establish on a regular weekly pattern. How do we help our kids think about taking a rest, which may mean leaving it undone? It's an unsettling feeling.
One of the interesting things happening culturally is all the technology that's supposed to save us time, but it's actually sort of serving to speed us up. Like, the more I'm swirling around email and phone and all those things, it makes my blood pressure go faster. It speeds me up internally. Another practical thing that I heard recently, which I thought was really good, I'd never heard it before, it was the idea that if you work with your hands during the week, that's your labor, then try to have your rest being using your mind. If you work with your mind during the week, try to have your rest being with your hands.
I love that.
I like that, right? So, I mean, my work, my primary exercise is typing. That's like my primary cardio during the week. So sometimes I've told you this, I cannot wait for my day off to be able to get out in the yard and rake the lawn. I am so excited to be able to go rake. And for me, that is a change, right? It's a rest from my labor. I thought that was an interesting thing to consider.
I think that's super helpful, and also a reminder of how easy it is for Christians to bring in that legalism and judgmental attitude. It's specifically, I can't remember right now, I should have been more prepared, that Paul talks about the judgment that Christians are doing in the early church about, you say this is a holy day, or, that he's calling on them that not to judge. And I think we fall into that habit too, that we can be judgmental when in reality, if mowing the lawn is restful for you, then mow the lawn. Do something if it's with your hands that brings rest, then you should do that. And I think that, again, as a family, we really need to ask the Lord to help us apply this commandment in our home. And I like to say to my kids, don't look to the right or the left. Don't try to figure out if what we're doing matches up with what this person's doing or that person's doing. We need to be listening. And as long as we feel like we are walking in faith and that we are serving God and honoring this commandment, that is what the Lord is requiring of us.
Yeah, so with this fourth commandment, many Christians just ignore it altogether. They're like 9 commandment Christians. Some people will say, well, I don't want to be legalistic about it. And I get that. We don't want to be legalistic about it either. People will say, well, I just want to obey the spirit of the law. And that is true. With the letter of the law kills, but the spirit of the law gives life. So if that's you, if you're like, well, I just want to obey the spirit of this commandment, great. How do you obey the spirit of the Sabbath law? Now, the way you answer that question might be different than your neighbor. That's what Amy was just talking about. But if we don't have an answer to that, here's how I obey the spirit of the Sabbath law. Here's how my family obeys the spirit of the Sabbath law. Then we're not obeying it. Then we've really just put a line through it and said, this is not something that is for me. Ultimately, this commandment, like all the commandments, is to point us to Christ And this one in particular point us to our eternal rest in Christ. This is the way Jesus described it in Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We would point you to a resource from our friend Marianne Howard at D6 Family. Her book is simply titled Rest, and we're going to have a link to that book down in the show notes. We would love to see you in person at one of our next live upcoming events around the country. April 12th, the Healing Family Relationship Seminar will be in West Chicago, Illinois. Then later on in April, we'll be at the D6 National Family Ministry Conference in Orlando. The Visionary Family Conference is coming to Atlanta. I'll be speaking at the Iowa State Homeschool Convention in early June. And then we want you to register for summer camp. The clock is ticking on this registration. We would encourage you, July 19 to 25, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, family camp, all the generations together. If you've been thinking about it, now's the time to get to our website, visionaryfam.com, click events, learn all about it, and register. We can only take about 175 people at this camp, and it is filling up, and we want you there. If you have any questions or comments about today's show, or most importantly, if you've got a prayer need, our team here at Visionary Family Ministries would love to pray with you and for you. You can email us at podcast@visionaryfam.com. And we look forward to our next time together with you on Family Vision.